So today is the super user training. I'm just going to mute everybody just because I'm getting a bit of feedback. So if you just unmute yourself if you want to ask anything. So today we're just going to be concentrating in the admin area, which is just at the top here. And the admin area is where all of the system configuration is managed. So we'll be concentrating in large part on the audit section. So we'll go through how to set up your proper audit schedules and how to amend the configuration of the existing audits. After that, we'll move on to role management. So if you want to configure additional roles so that your users have different levels of access across the system, I'll take you through how to do that. We'll then look at the email configuration area just to make sure all of that is set up correctly. We'll then look at action setup. And then at the bottom, I'll take you through some of the key areas to be aware of within your site settings and the company setup information as well. So the first thing we'll look at is setting up your audit schedules. And on the last session, we set up a few schedules with an ad hoc frequency. And ad hoc just meant that you could come in and you could have a practice with completing those audits whenever you liked, as many times as you liked. But going forwards, you'll probably want to take off those ad hoc schedules and you'll want to set up some proper schedules. So you might decide that you want to do some of the audits once a month, some of them once a quarter, some of them twice yearly, for example. So what we'll do is we'll go through the steps of how to set those up. So if we just come into manage audits just here, this is where you'll be able to see a list of all the audits that are currently set up on your system. And if we just go into accidents and incidents at the top, we then just need to come to our scheduling button in the top right hand corner. Confirm the name of the location that we want to set the schedule up against. So it'll just be Applecross Nursing Home. If we then click assign, it'll take us into the scheduling area and we can see that at the moment the frequency is down as ad hoc. But if we want to change that from ad hoc to something else, we just need to press the edit button on the end just here. Untick ad hoc when required. Select our new frequency and input our new quantity. So in the frequency dropdown, you can see you've got a variety of different options. So you can set the schedule up to be done sort of daily all the way through to yearly. And with accidents and incidents, do you know how often you'll be likely to do that going forwards? I would say that most people tend to do that once a month or once a quarter. You got a preference on what we set that up for? Everyone might just need to unmute themselves just because I did mute everybody at the beginning.
Yeah, that could be monthly.
Yeah, monthly. Yeah, so we can select month in frequency and we can then add a 1 in quantity to say that we want to do 1 a month. If the frequency was different and you wanted to do more than 1 on that frequency, you would just amend the quantity accordingly. And where we've got start date will always just auto-populate based on the beginning of the latest frequency that you've set up. So because our frequency is monthly, our start date is just auto-populated to the 1st of April. But if, however, we wanted the schedule to start further down the line, you can come to your calendar icon and I could say that I wanted it to start from June, for example. But we'll say that we want it to start from the 1st of April. And once we've filled that information in, we just need to press the save button. And you'll then get this pop-up that says, do you want to end the current schedule? So you can only have one schedule set up per audit at one time. So in order to basically override the schedule from ad hoc to monthly, we just need to say yes to that message. And that now updates the frequency, so our frequency is down as monthly. And to actually add in when we want the audit to open for us and when we want it to close, we then just need to click this add schedule button just here. And that brings us into this table view. And you'll always find that the start date and the end date on the left-hand side autofills based on the frequency and the start date that you inputted in the previous screen. And where we've got the open deadline and close deadline, these are just blank. And this is where we've got to decide when we want the audit to open for us to start completing and when we want it to close. So our start date and the end date is the 1st of April to the last day in April. So if you are auditing for the period of April, you would probably look to open the audit on the 1st of May. So I generally always recommend that you set the open deadline to the day after the audit period end date. So if I come to the calendar icon, we can find May and we can select the 1st. And then the close deadline is completely dependent on how long you want to give yourselves to complete this audit. I'd say that most people tend to give themselves a week or two, depending on what the audit is, but you can give yourselves longer if you'd prefer. So how long do you want to give yourselves to complete the accidents and incidents audit on the system? Oh, is everybody still on mute still? I think everybody's on mute, so you might just need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, 2 weeks is fine.
2 weeks, yeah. So if I come to the calendar icon, we'll do that until the 14th of May. And then whenever you're setting a schedule up, I would always recommend that you switch this repeat indefinitely toggle on. If I was not to switch that repeat indefinitely toggle on, I have only set the schedule up for April. And then when May came around, I would have to come in and I would have to set up the schedule again for May. If I switch this repeat indefinitely toggle on, it just means that I am happy for this audit to follow the same cycle month on month, unless I come in and make any changes. So always just switch that on whenever you set a schedule up. And then if you click the save button, you'll get this scheduling table at the bottom. And once you've got that scheduling table, that just confirms that there is now a schedule set up against this audit. Once you have set your schedule up, you are able to copy it across to other audits if you want to as well. And to do that, you can just use this icon on the end, which is your clone to audit button. So if, for example, there are other audits in the system that you want to apply the same monthly schedule to and the same open and close deadline date, instead of having to go into those audits one by one and set up each schedule again individually, what you can do is you can just click on that clone to audit button. You've got the select audit type drop down. This will just give you a list of all the audits that are currently set up on the system. And it's just a case of going through and selecting those audits that you want to copy the schedule across to. So I don't know if you've got any others that you want to copy the same schedule across to, or if you want to discuss it after today's session and then come in and have a go at doing it yourselves. If I scroll through, you can.
I think we'll discuss that after today.
Yeah, we'll have one first.
Yeah, that's fine. So it would just be a case of selecting any in here. So you can select one or you can select all of them. And then over on the right hand side, just here, just select the home, which will just be Applecross Nursing Home. Click the save button, and then you should find that this audit scheduling table then appears against those audits that you've copied it across to as well. So that's just a quicker way of getting the schedules set up across your audits. And you've also got this set email notifications option in here as well. This is useful if you want certain users to be notified when a schedule is opening. If you click set email notifications, in the bottom left-hand corner here, you'll have a list of any users that have been set up on the system. And if I were to tick Andre, for example, and I press across, on the 1st of May at midnight, Andre would then receive an email notification from the system letting him know that this schedule is about to open. So I'll just unselect that for now. But yeah, I'd recommend you do that across all the audits so that the right people are being notified every time a schedule is opening. Any questions on scheduling? Does that make sense on how that works, and would you be happy to set up schedules across all of the other ones?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, brilliant. So if we now just move into the audits themselves, we'll go through how you can amend the configuration of them. So I'm just going to click on accidents and incidents at the top just here. So when you click into an audit, it takes you into the configuration area, which is just here. And if we start off at the top, you've got your audit type name and your description. So if you don't like what we've called the audit, feel free to amend it. If you're also editing the questions within the audit, you may want to just update the description so that reflects exactly what you're auditing within the audit. And then below that, you've got your audit requirement area. So if you want to make an audit specific to either an individual service user, employee, room, or date, it's just a case of ticking the box next to the relevant item. And going back to the last session, if you remember when we were completing the client care plan audit, before we could actually answer the questions, we had to select who the service user was at the top that we were doing the audit about. And that's because against that audit, the service user box was ticked. With things like staff HR and staff training audits, employee is ticked on those ones. So again, before you answer those audit questions, you'll just have to select who the staff member is before you actually answer those questions. So all of the audits in the system are pre-configured. Some of them are set to be specific to an individual service user or employee. Some of them are just general, but you can come in and you can change that just with this audit requirement area just here. And then over on the right-hand side, we've got some additional audit settings. And the first area we've got within here is the rating calculation that you want to use for the audit. And you'll probably find that typically most of the audits in the system are set to the option of rate audit based on rating dropdown. And again, going back to the previous session, if you remember, after we'd answered all of the audit questions, we had to choose our rating ourselves from the rating drop-down options. So rate audit based on rating drop-down just means that the person completing the audit has to select what rating they think they should have been given after they've answered all of the questions. If, however, you want to standardise the scoring across the audit, so by standardise, I mean the person completing the audit will just get an automatic rating at the end after they've answered the questions, instead of having to choose the rating themselves. You can change the option to rate audit based on score. And when you change the option to rate audit based on score, you get this audit scoring table at the top. And the idea here is that you basically say how many points you need to achieve across the audit to get each of these ratings down the left-hand side. And to set this up, what you have to do is, if you scroll down to the existing questions, if you click on the pencil icon is like your edit button. And where you've got this scoring area down here, what you have to do is you basically have to assign a score to each particular audit response. So generally, the non-compliant response will always get no points, or it'll just be blank. On this one, you can see that partially met is going to receive 1 point and fully met is going to get 4 points. But you can completely change that if you wish. So you may decide that partially met is also going to get 0 points, and you may just decide that all of your compliant responses will just get 1 point, for example. But you can dictate exactly how many points you want to assign to each audit response. So you'd go through all of your questions and do that. You would then total up the max number of points that the audit could be out of in total. So say, for example, I had 15 questions within my audit. I decided that all of my non-compliant responses were going to get 0 points and all of my compliant responses were going to get 1 point. My audit would be out of 15 points in total. Once I've got that total, I can change the option to rate audit based on score, and I can then configure this table. So if my audit was out of 15 points in total, I may say that in order to achieve an outstanding rating on this audit, I need to score greater than or equal to 14 points. For good, I might say that people need to score greater than or equal to 12. Requires improvement could be greater than or equal to 10. And inadequate would then be anything less than or equal to 9 points. And once you've set that up, if you just click Save Settings, it'll then save that table for you. And then if somebody were to complete that audit on the front end of the system, instead of them having to choose the rating themselves, the system will just give them an automatic rating at the end. The moment, the rate audit based on score option is set to kind of the rating scale that CQC use, which is just outstanding through to inadequate. Do you use the 6-point scale that Care Inspectorate Scotland use?
Yeah, we do.
Yep, because what you can do is you can basically customize these ratings. So if you want the audit ratings to reflect that 6-point scale, I would recommend customizing them. And I just need to switch on the customize option for you. So just give me 1 second. It's just in here. There we go. We've got customized ratings. So I'm just going to switch that on. And then now, if we come into our admin area, you'll see at the bottom of audits, we've got this custom audit ratings option. So in here, this is where you can set up the audit scoring labels that you want to use.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you just go to add new rating. What I'll do is I'll just set it up as, I've got it on a screen just here.
That would be one, level 1 would be unsatisfactory, yeah?
Yeah, so if I put unsatisfactory, you can then decide what colour you want to be assigned to that. So I take it that would just be kind of
red, I
red.
think, yeah.
Yeah. I'll set it up in a basic way, and if you want to come in and you want to edit
that
them,
looks
then
good.
you can do. So if we do unsatisfactory, I've got weak down as the next one.
Yeah, that's correct.
If we do that one as kind of orange.
Yeah.
I've then got adequate. Yeah, well, I'll do that as yellow. I've then got good. So I'll just work my way along. We'll say that good is just going to be normal green.
Yeah.
And then I've got very good. So we'll do very good as blue. Lastly is excellent. And I'll just leave excellent as that one.
Yeah.
But again, you can come in and just amend those if you want to.
Yeah.
But once you've got those set up, if I now go back into my audit, so if I just come into manage audits, accidents and incidents, instead of doing rate audit based on score, I can select rate audit based on custom audit ratings. And it will give me those ratings that I've set up in that custom audit ratings area. And again, it would just be a case of going through and configuring the table in the same way. So you could say, again, greater than or equal to, you might want to give yourselves full marks in order to get excellent. Very good could be 13. Good could be something like 12. Adequate could be weak could be 9, and then unsatisfactory would be anything less than or equal to 8. So you'd go through and just configure it in the same way. And again, just press save your settings. And instead of giving you those CQC ratings, it'll give you the ones that you've configured yourself. Does that make sense on how that process works with the assigning the score and then configuring the table at the top?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll just change it back to rating drop down for now. And we'll just save that. So you can come in and you can configure that yourself. And you've also got an option at the bottom called Do Not Rate Audits. So I have seen people use the system to create things like meeting minute reports, meeting note reports, general sort of management reports. So more kind of using the functionality of the audits area, but the thing they're creating is not a traditional audit. So if you do want to create anything like that, that isn't a traditional audit format and doesn't therefore need an audit rating, you can just set it to do not rate audits instead. So I'll just change that back to rating dropdown. And then at the bottom here, you've got assign roles to audit. So if nothing is selected in here, it just means that all roles on the system can access and view this audit. Obviously, at the moment, you've just got one role set up on the system, which is called System Admin. But after we've looked at audit configuration, I will take you through how to configure additional roles on the system. And if you do configure additional roles, they'll appear in this list. And if I were to then tick System Admin, only my System Admin users would be able to view this audit, and anybody assigned to any of the other roles in the list wouldn't be able to view it. Again, I tend to see that on things like finance audits, where people just want to restrict that audit to either the finance team or the senior management team, for example. So if nothing is selected, everybody can see it. And if a role is selected, only that role will have access to the audit. And then if we just scroll down, if the audit's got sections set up within it, you'll be able to see those sections above the questions, like you can just here. So some of the audits have sections sort of pre-configured on them already. Some of them don't, and it'll just go straight into the questions. You can click through the sections and you can see which questions are currently attached to that section. And if you want to change the order of the sections, you can do so just by using these reorder arrows on the end. And if you want to actually edit the setup of the sections, you've got your configure sections button just here. You've got your edit icon if you want to rename any of the sections. Your delete icon will obviously just remove the section. And if you want to create additional sections, click Configure Sections. The only mandatory field in here is the section name. So if I just create a new section called Test, if I then just click Save, then just adds my test section onto the end. And if I just edit my test section, what you can also do within section setup as well is you can configure action rules. And where I'd recommend you use these action rules are, say, for example, you had a very important section that you'd created. You may want to set an action rule to say that if somebody were to score less than or equal to 5 points in your new section, action must be taken. And that would then mean that if somebody scored less than or equal to 5 points in your test section, they would have to create an action off the back of doing that, or they wouldn't be able to submit the audit on the system. You also have the option in here of action is recommended. Action is recommended means that the person completing the audit will be prompted to create an action off the back of scoring less than or equal to 5 points, but they don't necessarily have to. So whenever you're configuring action rules, you can decide whether you just want action to be recommended or whether you want action to be mandatory. And whenever you select action must be taken or action is recommended, you'll get this suggested action prompt to the right-hand side. And it's up to you whether you want to use suggested actions or not. So some people use them, some people don't. Where I'd recommend you use them is if you had a particular action in mind, for example, that you would want somebody to take were they to score less than or equal to 5 points in your test section. So if you had a particular action in mind, you can click that suggested action button, and it's then just a case of configuring the action in here. So input your action title, add a short description, assign it to a priority level, and attach it to an action category. And once you've configured that, if you press the Save button, it will then attach that suggested action to this action rule, and were somebody to score less than or equal to 5 points in your section, your suggested action would appear on the screen, and that person can then decide whether they want to take your suggested action or whether they want to create their own. Any questions on section setup?
No, not from me. That sounds straightforward.
No. So I'll just take out this test section. And just next to your configure sections button, you've got your add new question button. So as you go through and look at the audits, you may find that you're doing processes that we haven't accounted for in our questions. So if you do want to create additional questions, you can do just by using that add new question button. And once you click that, it'll take you to the question configuration screen, which just looks like this. So in the top right hand corner, if you've got sections set up within the audit, you can choose the section that you want to assign your question to. You've then got the ID area. So this is typically just the question number. So what I'd recommend you do is just scroll through, find the latest question number. So this one is 10. And if I then wanted to add a new question, my ID number for the next one would just be number 11. You've then got your question type drop down just here. So you have got the option of lots of different question types on the system. You'll find that with the audits that are currently on your system, most of them do follow the yes/no question type format. And yes/no just means that yes is the compliant response, no is the non-compliant response. Yes/no inverse is the other way round. So yes would be non-compliant, no would be compliant. And you've also got the same, but with NA on the end as well. So if you want a not applicable response as well as yes and no, you can select either of the bottom two options. But as well as the yes/no types, you have got the option of selecting from lots of other different question types. So things like date and time picker will give you a date or a time option as a response. So if you want somebody to be responding, with a date or a time, instead of just a yes or no option, you can select date or time picker. Text will give the person a text box to type their answer into. Radio RAG gives you red, amber and green responses. Drop down is quite a good one. Drop down allows you to configure your own responses from scratch. So if I were to select drop down, I then just get a blank options box. I could type my first answer in there, and then if I press the plus icon on the end, I get my second option. I can type that into there, and I can do that as many times as I need to create as many responses as I want to. But generally, if you select a question type, it will show you what the response options will look like at the bottom. So if I were to then select PC compliance, it'll update with those options for me. So I tend to recommend just coming in and having a bit of a play around with this drop down, look at all the different question types, see what the response options look like, and you can then decide which question type is going to be most applicable to the question you're wanting to ask. If I just choose yes, no, you've then got your questions box. So in here, add in the question that you're wanting to ask. And then at the bottom here is where we just need to configure what action is required for each question response. And whenever you're given the compliant response, so that'll be the response that's in green, action required by default will always be set to action not required. Because in 99% of cases, if you're given the compliant response, you're not going to need to create an action off the back of doing that. However, whenever you're given the non-compliant response, so the response that is in red, by default, that will always be set to action is recommended. So like section setup, action is recommended means that you'll be prompted to create an action off the back of your non-compliant response, but you don't necessarily have to. In the same way, if, however, you do want action to be mandatory, just change the option to action must be taken instead. And in the same way as section setup, if I were to then respond with no to this new question, I would have to create an action. off the back of doing that, or I wouldn't be able to submit the audit. And in the same way, you'll get your suggested action button whenever action required is recommended or must be taken. And this works in the same way. So if you have a suggested action in mind, were somebody to respond with no for this new question, just go through, configure the action in the same way, click the save button, and then if somebody were to respond with no, that suggested action would appear on the screen and they can then decide whether they want to take that or create their own. As we touched on before, you've then got the scoring area just to the right. So if you are wanting to configure that audit scoring table that we just looked at a moment ago, just make sure that you assign a score to each response. So it may be that you decide that you're going to give 0 points to every non-compliant response, and you may just decide that all of your compliant responses are going to get 1 point, but there's no sort of limit on the score that you can assign to a response. So if you wanted it to be 4 or 5 points, for example, there's nothing stopping you from doing that if you want to weight the questions more heavily in favour on the audit. But if you do want to use that scoring table, do just make sure you assign a score to each response, or the audit scoring table won't work for you properly. And then up to the right, just here, you've got 2 tick boxes, and these will always be ticked by default. Show optional comment just means that you get that comments box below the audit question. So I'd always recommend you leave that ticked, just so the person completing the audit has the option of adding in their evidence. And is answer required is just whether the question is mandatory or not. So if there are certain questions that don't need to be answered each time, just untick that and it'll then get rid of the red asterisk against that question. But once you've been through and you've configured your question, click the save button and it'll just add that question to the bottom of the audit for you. And as well as adding new questions, you can edit existing questions as well. And your pencil icon just here is your edit button. So if you click that pencil icon, it'll take you into the question and all of this is editable. So it may just be that you want to tweak the wording of the question slightly, but you can change everything from the section, the question type, action required, score. So feel free to edit the configuration of the existing questions as much as possible. You've got your bin icon next to the pencil. So that's just your delete button. So again, as you go through the questions, there may be questions that just aren't applicable to the processes that you follow. So feel free to take any out that just aren't applicable. You've got your reorder arrows on the end. So whenever you add a new question, you'll find that it often just adds itself to the bottom of the audit. But if you do want to bring that question higher, just use your arrows on the end to pull that further up. And the last button that you've got is the add sub-question button. So if you want to create a sub-question, and you can see that there's already a sub-question for question 9 at the moment, it's just a case of clicking add sub-question. It'll take you into the exact same question configuration screen. You would go through and create your question in the same way. When you press the save button, it'll attach itself like so. So it's still its same question, but it's kind of already attached to question 9. And that is everything for audit configuration. Anybody got any other questions on that? Everybody happy with how that works?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, brilliant. So if we just come back into admin. What we'll do now is we'll just move into the security area and we'll just come into role management just here. And as I mentioned before, at the moment, you've just got one role set up in the system, which is called system admin. And system admin is like the sort of super user role within the system. It has pretty much all access assigned to it. And if you want to view the access that is assigned to a role, just click the edit button next to it, and it'll take you into that role. And within each role, you've got role name and description. So at the moment, this is called system admin, but if you do want to amend that, you can do. Within each role, you've got an end user tab and a system admin tab. And end user is what can be done on the front end of the system through your left-hand menu. System admin is what can be done from within the admin tab. So essentially all of the system configuration. And you'll find that both areas, they're broken down into kind of the individual tabs that you get down the left-hand side and kind of the different sections that you've got within your admin area. So it's broken down into kind of actions, audits, complaints, compliments. Obviously switched off CQC notifications because you won't be using that functionality. Got your dashboards area, employees, reports, and your service user area. And you'll see that most of the access on here is just around whether somebody can add, edit, delete, submit, reopen, all of the different items that you've got in here. In the same way with system admin, it's broken down into your sections. So you've got your action section, your audit section, and again, each sort of list is just the list that you've got within the admin area. So whether you can kind of schedule audits, edit the configuration of the audits, edit company information, edit kind of dashboards, email config, role management, and kind of the general site setup. So system admin has all of the kind of key items that you would need access to in the system selected against it. But if you do want to create additional roles in the system, so if you don't want everybody to be a kind of super user and you want certain people to have more restricted access, you can create additional roles. And you can create additional roles in one of two ways. The first way is just to use the new role icon at the top just here. And if you click on the new role icon, you can then go through and you can configure the role from scratch. So I'd recommend using that way if you've got a role and it's going to have very limited access assigned to it, because it'll be quicker just to go through and tick up the boxes from scratch. If, however, you've got a role that's going to have a very similar level of access to a role, but you want it to just have slightly less access, you can just use this clone a role button just here. And that basically clones the existing role. And instead of having to tick up everything from scratch, you can just untick the areas that you don't want that new role to have access to. So two options, and it'll just depend on the access that you're assigning to the role as to which one is best. Do you know what kind of role configuration you're likely to need in the system? Or again, is that something that you need to sort of take away and discuss amongst yourselves?
I think we need to have a wee bit of a think about that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so if I just open up the existing role, I'd say that quite often people tend to create an additional role in the system that has system admin access switched off. So there may be certain people that you just want to be completing audits and completing actions, for example. So yeah, it's quite often that people create an additional role and they just switch off everything in system admin so that those people can't go in and start editing the audits, scheduling the audits and things like that.
Yeah.
And often as well, people will create another role and they will switch off things like validate an action functionality.
Yeah.
So going back to the last session, you assign obviously an action to an action owner. And once it's been completed, a validator would go in and basically sign off that the action had been completed correctly. So quite often people will create an additional role and they won't allow that role to validate actions. So typically validate an action would just be left to your system admin users.
Yeah.
Things like discarding things as well. You may want a second role where people can't just go in and delete things from the system. That's quite common as well. Yeah, you've got your complaints and compliments area. So I guess if you might not want certain people to be investigating complaints and things like that. Again, you might want to leave that to your system admins. And with the employee area as well, again, you might just want to limit adding and editing users to your system admins as well, so that other people can't go into the system and they can't just give other people logins to the system. So I'd say they tend to be the kind of key areas that people create additional roles for and kind of switch off those bits of access. But if you want to have chance to, I know we've got kind of a week between now and the Q&A session. If you want to have a think about what role access you want on that Q&A session, we can then go through and we can get it all configured for you, if that would help.
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. But if you do set up a new role within the system and you then want to change a role that somebody is assigned to, you just need to come to home, find that person's record in the employee area. So if I came into Andre, for example, in your roles and permissions tab, which is where you initially set that person up as a user, you've just got a manage role option just here. And if you'd set up another role in the system, it would appear in the drop down. You can change their role, press save, and then the next time that person logs in, they would have amended access. Oh, sorry, did you ask a question?
Is everything got brother? Was that happy?
It's okay.
You're right.
Good time.
I know. Hello. Sergeant.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, was that a question from somebody?
Sorry, got caught up and talking to somebody else there.
Oh, no
that's
worries.
fine, that's fine.
But yeah,
Apologies
roles
for-
and permissions is just where you can come in and edit somebody's role. So if you do ever set up additional roles, come into the record, go to manage role, and you can change that person's access. And then if we just come to the email configuration area at the top, the first thing you've got within here is called email audit history. So this will just give you an overview of all the emails that have gone out from the system. So these are all the emails that have kind of gone out at the moment. I think they're just example action emails, but you can basically see what time they were dispatched from the system. You can have a look at the email body and any attachments that were sent with that as well. You'll also notice that at the moment, the actual dispatch time is blank. And if that is blank, it means that this email hasn't actually been sent out from the system. And the reason that these haven't been sent out from the system is just that your emails are currently set to hold. So the next thing I'll take you through is just how we can release those emails. But we basically set the emails to hold during the training so that if people are playing around on the system, everybody isn't just receiving loads of junk email. So if you come into here and the actual dispatch time is blank, that just lets you know that the email hasn't actually gone out from the system. But this is quite a good area because you just, as I say, get the audit trail to see what has actually been sent out. If people are saying that, they haven't received their action owner email, you can come into here and you can basically see that went out from the system. And then just below email audit history, we have actually got the email configuration area. And in here, this is where you can see that currently the emails are down to hold. So in order to release those, we just need to press our edit button. We'll change the hold status to release. And we'll release from now, just so you don't receive a load of previous junk. So going forwards from today, if you are using the system to do audits, assign actions, you should find that those email notifications do actually go out from the system now. And I'm just going to remove our no reply at theaccessgroup.com email from this field just here. What you can do in top level and BCC is you can add in 2 email addresses in here. And if you put emails in here, those people will just get basically a copy of all of the emails that go out from the system. So every time an audit is submitted, these people would get a copy of the email. Every time an action owner notification was sent, these people would also get a copy of that. So I'd say to add an email in here if you've got somebody at the top that wants full visibility of all the emails that are going out from the system. If you don't, I'd just recommend that you leave it blank. Is there an email that you want me to add into there, or do you want me to just leave it blank for now?
Sorry, is this top level?
Yeah, top
Email.
level in BCC. So you've got the option of adding in 2 emails, and those people would basically receive a copy of every email that was sent out from the system. So I'd only really recommend you do it if you have got somebody that wants full visibility of everything that's going out from the system. If you're happy to just use that email audit history area instead,
Yeah,
I just
might
recommend
use
that you leave it
history area.
blank.
We
Yeah,
did
that's
that for
fine.
another system and it ended up being a nightmare.
Yeah,
I'll leave
you will
it
get
off.
a lot of emails if you do.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, if we just press save. And then at the bottom here, you've got the option of blocking certain people from receiving emails within the system. Probably not something you'll ever really need to do, but you can select your employees from the list, hit save, and it'll add them to the blocked users list, or you can do it via email address as well. So add the email in, press the plus icon, and it'll add them to the blocked emails list. And then to the left-hand side up here, we've got your action setup area. So if we come into here, down at the bottom is where you've got your action category management area. So going back to the last session, when we created an action on the system, we had a big drop down of action categories that we were able to select from. And this is where all those categories are set up. So there's quite a lot in here at the moment. So you'll probably want to come in and make them a bit more refined. The generic ones include a few CQC ones as well. So you'll probably want to come in and take those out or just amend those so they reflect your regulator instead. So you've got your edit icon to edit the word of the category. Delete will just take it out. And if you want to add additional categories, click add category, add in your description and hit the save button. Another thing to note is that whenever you see the word risk in the system, please just ignore it. Risk is basically very old functionality within the system that has since been updated by the action functionality. And we are planning to kind of remove it from the system soon, but some of our much older customers are still using it. So that's why you can see the word risk in some areas of the system. It's not a case that we're just not taking you through how it works. As I say, it's just old functionality and it has been updated by the action functionality. So whenever you see the word risk in the system, I'd just advise you to just ignore it. And if we scroll down to the bottom, just here, we've got a few site settings just in here. And the first area you've got in here is configure custom dashboards. And this is basically, if I just come to home at the top, for open up dashboards, this is basically where I configured the Applecross nursing home dashboard for you so that it was more applicable to the functions that you were going to be using the compliance system for. But within here, if you do want to change that dashboard at all, you can just click on widgets just here. It'll give you kind of the areas that I've set up on the dashboard. And if you want to change the order of any of these items, you can just kind of drag and drop it. So I've obviously set it up to have kind of audits at the top, actions next, and then complaints at the bottom. If you want to move any of those around, you can do. And you can also decide who the dashboard is accessible by as well. And that is dictated by the different roles that you set up within the system. So it may be that if you configure some extra roles in the system, you actually only want this custom dashboard to be accessed by your system admin users, for example. So just bear that in mind when you set up additional roles. If you do want those roles to be able to see this, you'll just need to come in here and you just need to tick those up. We've got configure providers. So this is just where we've set up your provider information. So it's just called Applecross Nursing Home. The provider area is CQC centered. So if you do need to configure a new provider, like I have, just make sure you put a dash in the CQC number area, but it just requires kind of 3 mandatory bits of information. So new provider name, telephone number, and then country, which for yourselves would just be Scotland. And then if you just save that, it'll add that new provider into here for you. You've also got configure soft labels. This is just where the system terminology is managed. So if you want the service users and employees to be called something different, come in here and update those. You've got your home label as well. For residential, we tend to just leave that as home. But if you do want that to say office or site or anything different, come in and change that. And we've left role on role as well. But again, some people change that to user profile or permissions. So if you do need to change those terms at all, come into here, press save, and they'll update for you on the front end of the system. And if we come to mandatory fields configuration, going back to the previous session, if I just come into my test system, when you are creating a complaint or complement on the system, if I just come to add new complaint, the moment you can see that the only mandatory field on the form is the person who has complained. And that's because in this mandatory fields configuration area, that's the only box that is ticked to be mandatory. So if you want to make any of the other fields on the form mandatory, you can just come in and tick the is mandatory box next to that relevant area. And you can also say who it's mandatory for as well. So obviously at the moment you've just got the system admin role, but it could be that certain people are missing filling in certain bits of information. So you could just make details of complement, for example, mandatory to a specific role on the system. But you've got your complement area at the top. You've then got your complaint area just below that. Below that, you've got your action form area, and then you've got your service user form at the bottom. So at the moment, action owner and responsible person are down to be mandatory. If you ever just want those to be optional instead, come in and untick those fields. And I've ticked room number on the service user form because you're residential. But if you ever don't want that to be a mandatory field, again, just come in and untick it from within here. And then just down at the bottom here, we've got your company information. So you've got logo management, which is where we've just uploaded your company logo. So if that ever changes, just come to upload logo and you can override that. Any reports that are printed on the system, the logo that's in here will just appear at the top for you. Above that, you've got location management. So this is where we've just set up your location of Applecross Nursing Home. If you do get, you expand or you get an additional branch, for example, in this locations area is where you would need to come to set up that additional location. So you just need to click on add new at the top. Select the provider, which would be Applecross Nursing Home, unless you configure an additional provider in that provider area that I just showed you. It to a region, so it'll just be standard. Registration details, and select that as Care Inspectorate and add in your Care Inspectorate number. You then just need to go through and configure kind of basic sort of home information, so the name, occupancy level, phone number. And if you want it to be set up as a standard location on the system that you can assign to people so that they can complete audits about that location, add complaints and compliments about that location, for example, just select the location type as location. It will then ask for a location ID number and a location URL. Again, that's driven by CQC. So for yourselves, just put a dash or an X in both of those boxes. And then at the bottom, it'll just ask for the address information. And once you've set that up, hit the save button. It'll add that new location into this area. And then if you want to give certain users access to that new location, it will just be a case of coming back to home, finding that person's record. So if we use Andre as an example again, and then next to roles and permissions, you've got your locations tab. So if you remember when we set you all up on the first session, we had to come in and we had to assign the Applecross Nursing Home location to all of your records. So whenever you set somebody up, you have to choose their primary location first of all. But once you've saved their record, if you then want to give them access to additional locations, come to add edit locations, change it to all homes, and then you would have those additional homes or locations that you'd set up, and you would just select all of the ones that you wanted to give this particular person access to. And obviously, once you've done that, they would then be able to, in the audits area, for example, have access to that additional location to complete audits about that new location. And the same with all the other areas of the system. So if you do set up new locations, that's just how you kind of dictate who has access to which location on the system. And then within here as well, we've also got configure employee grades. So I know we touched on this on the first session, but when you set somebody up on the system, you have to just assign a grade to that person. And with the grade setup, you've got 3 tiers of grade. So you've got your employee grade categories and your employee grade types. These tend to be more general. So in here, we've got care staff, facilities, kitchen, nursing, and office. We've got the same on the grade type side. And then when you're adding grades onto the system with the add new button, you have to just add in the name of the grade, assign it to one of the grade types that you've set up. And then this is home-based toggle, is just whether the grade is actually based at one of your homes. And as you've just got one home, you'll just need to switch that on for all of your new grades. The only time that would really ever be switched off is for much bigger providers where they've got lots of different locations, and it may be that they've got a virtual head office at the top and certain grades may not actually be based at one of their physical locations, so they would switch as home-based off. But because you've just got the one, just ensure that you switch that as home-based toggle on for any new grades that you set up on the system. And that's pretty much everything for sort of system configuration. I don't know if anybody's got any further questions on any of that. Anything that you want me to go back over again?
No questions from me. No, it looks good.
No.
No, perfect. So we have got a bit of a gap before the Q&A session. The Q&A session is on Wednesday the 13th at 9:30. So that's just an hour and a half. You can use it for questions if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to. A lot of the time I use that time with customers and we just go through and we start configuring parts of the system. So if you've got a new audit, for example, that isn't on the system at the moment, we can spend that time going through and configuring that audit so it's there on the system ready for you to use. If you want to spend that time going through all the scheduling, if you discuss that amongst yourselves in the next week, we can get all the schedules set up. If you want to do all the standardized scoring against all the audits, so that's sort of there and ready to go, we can also do that on the session as well. So I'd say spend the next week sort of, yeah, maybe going through a few of the different areas, just discussing the bits that we've gone through today. Think about role management, and we can also get that set up on that session as well. So yeah, just try and get onto the system, try and do as much as possible, just so you get as much out of that hour and a half next week as you can. But I will send across the user guide from today. I'll share the recording with everybody. I'll send the invite across for next Wednesday. And if anybody's got any questions or any struggles on the system before then, just feel free to drop me an email.
Rachel, I've been messing about with our own one, if you know what I mean, our own system. So can we reset that?
Yes, is that, yeah, I think in here. Did you set up some kind of dummy actions?
Well, I did. I tried some mattress audits and some bits and pieces.
Okay, yeah, I think I saw those in the list. So yeah, so I think at the moment they're down to just be done once a month. Is that an actual sort of schedule?
No, I was just messing about with it because I was just testing it out and messing about with it. I really just want to kind of get back to scratch now. So because now that we've had these sessions, I can set it up properly and go back to the sessions and make sure I've done everything properly.
Yeah, so what we can do is say on the mattress one, if we just come into that scheduling area, we can just delete the schedule.
Yeah.
So if you set up a schedule, provided you haven't got any completed audits attached to it, you can just delete it. So we come back. Okay, so it's been completed. So what I'll do is, let me just check in your audit planning area. So it's saying one's been completed, but it doesn't look like.
Yeah, that might have been me.
It's not appearing in the audit planning area. Let me just see if we can. Yeah, 'cause it's saying status completed 28th to the 31st. And there must be something. What I can do is I can play around and I can find what you've done and I can
That
just
would
take
be
everything
smashing
off
if you
for
don't-
you.
If you don't mind, that
Just-
would be great. And
Yeah,
then,
no, that's fine.
you know, once I'm having a wee look, I'll use the videos for reference. I made the videos available to our staff on our intranet and our e-learning system, so they can go back and forward to them as well.
Okay, perfect. But yeah, do you want me to take off all of these so it's just kind of blank and ready to go from
Yeah,
scratch?
because I'll set it up and I'll talk to the various staff about frequency. I don't want to, you know, quite like to talk to people about the frequency of things before we start rolling this out. But I
Yeah,
am
that's
keen to
fine.
get it out quite quickly. So we'll look at it this week.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I'll take all these off then. Hopefully this will then just be blank. And
Yeah.
then yeah, on that
Yeah,
next
just to
session,
give
if you
the
want
clean
to go
slate,
through and
that's
get all the proper ones set up, we can do that
Yeah.
as well. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll have a play around. I'll find out sort of what you've done, just so you don't have to sort of sit watching me do that for 10 minutes.
No, that's perfect. Okay, thanks very
Perfect.
much.
That's
Thanks
all
for
right.
your
Thanks
time.
everyone. No
Thank
problem at all.
you. Right.
Speak to you all
Right.
next week.
Bye-bye.
See you
Okay,
later.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.